Hi everyone, I'm Jess and welcome back to my channel. In my previous video, I worked on fitting a pair of 18th century stays, specifically the Scroop Augusta stays. And now in this video, it's finally time to make the final version. Now, I did start this pretty much right after I finished making the mock-up and got all the pattern finalized. And then I got to a certain point where I kind of took about a 2-3 month break. Hence why this video is now coming out in June and not my initially intended target of like March. But alas, work, life, vacation, procrastination kind of got in the way. But now I finally found the time to kind of focus in and get it done. So without further ado, let's get going. Let's start with some materials. For my outer layer, I'll be using this beautiful silk taffeta. For my strength layers, I have a light mid-weight linen that I'll be using to create some linen buckram, and I'll link the tutorial I used in the description. The next strength layer I have is some linen cotton canvas. For thread, I have 3 different kinds of thread, the first being some cotton thread that I'll be using for basting as well as machine sewing my boning channels. The next thread I have is some silk, and I have a various array of colors because I haven't quite decided yet, but this will be for my eyelets. And finally, I have some linen thread, and this will be used to seam all the panels together. The next category is tapes and ribbons. Now, I'm not quite sure what I want to do for the binding or for covering my seams, so I have an array of options here. First up being some Petersham ribbon. Next, some silk taffeta ribbon. Some silk, double-faced silk satin ribbon, some more silk taffeta ribbon, and an additional color of Petersham ribbon. Now I have some linen tape. This is the more traditional route for covering your seams, as well as some cording. And some more cording, because clearly, definitely very indecisive category for me. And what is a pair of stays without some boning? Like, can't have stays without structure. And so for this category, I will be using some synthetic whalebone. Before I go any further and begin cutting, I need to make my linen buckram. To do this, I'll be using some gum Arabic. This was the easiest of the gums to find since it's still used today specifically as a thickener for cooking. And creating this solution is pretty simple. It only requires water and the powder. And I'm not really following any specific measurement here. I just kind of eyeballed it and aimed for a thick solution. Didn't quite achieve that. I definitely think I could have used more gum in the process, but alas, it was too late and I wasn't going to restart. So after I got it dried and ironed, it was then on to prepping my fabric. So I may have gone a little bit wild when I bought the cotton linen canvas, and I bought like 6 yards. So instead of having to wrangle all 6 yards on my table, the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is just cut a meter out. I'm going to go ahead and iron this before I go any further. In instances of stays and corsets, I prefer to work with patterns that do not include seam allowance. This way I have the stitching lines drawn directly on the fabric and I can ensure accuracy when sewing. In order to save myself some time, I only trace the pattern onto the canvas, and then I use the canvas pieces to then cut out the buckram and taffeta. Because I have the seam lines already drawn, I didn't need to be precise about my seam allowance, and this also allowed just for some extra room if anything frayed. So after procrastinating and getting distracted, I finally got all my pieces cut out. So I have my linen cotton canvas, my linen buckram, and then my silk taffeta layers. I just have these pinned right now to hold them all together. I'm going to go in with a basting stitch and just better hold it together. Pins are kind of cumbersome sometimes. And then I'm also gonna probably do some pad stitching just to keep all the layers like in the center held down so that when I eventually go to add the boning channels, those won't shift as much. So it's almost 11 and I'm gonna call it a night, but I just finished basting all the pieces, all the layers together on each piece, and then also doing just some quick pad stitches to hold all the layers into place so that tomorrow I can get started transferring some of the boning channels from the pattern on here and getting those sewn into place. I decided that it was not a smart idea to use my friction heat pen on this project because I am like ironing in between steps and I still need my lines, my seam lines visible. So I am going back in with my pencil and drawing over them. Okay, so it's time to mark all the boning channels. This is going to take a long time. I am using a chalk pencil to mark all of them. And there are a lot. The front has 13 on its own, so 2 fronts, that's already 26 bones. This is the one that has the most bones, so hopefully once I get these ones done, the others will just fly by. So I had to go ahead and move this out of the way because given the iridescent quality of this fabric, I can barely see my chalk lines. So we are going with no light on this. And that's just the way it's gotta be. I'm also kind of playing thread chicken here because I am like almost out of thread and I'm hoping it's enough to at least finish this stitch line. If not, I might cry. Alrighty, first spool of thread finished. So for boning channels that start or stop at another boning channel, like these ones do, which these are for the tabs on this panel here, instead of back stitching like I would just to secure the ends at the bottom, I am just starting and making sure I'm putting my needle in at this boning channel and going straight down. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the top thread through. And I could tie a knot, but I don't want any like bumps created by the knots. So instead what I do is I pull this through. If I can get this one to come through, come on. Okay. And I'm going to thread a needle with the ends. And I'm almost going to just kind of like weave my threads in almost. Is kind of like a back stitch in a way. Basically going in where this line stops and coming out where the thread that I currently have threaded through my needle originally came in. Now I'm only going through the 2 strength layers. So I'm going through the cotton canvas and I'm going through the linen buckram. I'm not going through my outer layer. And then I'm just kind of pulling this and then I'm pulling it taut. And I will repeat the same process for this side. So there I have it. Then I'm just going to take these 2, give it a tug, nice and strong tug, and then I'm just going to trim it. Now I actually wouldn't recommend trimming them. I like reviewing what I did on this project. I would actually go in with my needle with that same thread and go right next to where it came out of and bury that thread in between the strength layers. That way they wouldn't get they wouldn't come undone, they won't get caught, and the inside looks a lot neater than what mine came out looking like.
So I have all my boning channels done. It took a while, but they're done. They are ready for bones. But before I get to the boning, I'm going to start trimming down the seam, all the seam allowance I have. That was just in case things started to fray, and just give me a little wiggle room when I was sewing and layering everything. So
So I think my next step in this process is to start slightly adding some boning. I'm going to bone the backs so I can start putting eyelets in, and same with the front. I have all my pieces. They have all their boning channels. I trimmed them down. Next step is to start putting some eyelets in. I've already gone ahead and marked the eyelets for the front pieces. I just marked them on the back for now, just to make sure that I did like the placement. I used the heat erasable pen, so I can always go back and, take an iron to it and let it disappear. But this pen does leave a little bit of a mark, so I just did it on the back. But I think I like the spacing, so eventually I'll transfer it to the front and work my eyelets through the front. And doing the same for the back. So based on the length of mine, I'm going with 13 eyelets on each side. And so I just created a quick guide. The pattern comes with one, but since I made a lot of changes, I just went in and did my own spacing. And so I'm just going to go ahead and transfer these to this. Before I did any hole punching in my actual fabric, I did a bunch of tests, and it was much needed because this is what I started out with. And these aren't great. They're uneven, they're very oval shaped. I also did some for color testing, and funny enough, this is actually the first test I did just to see the different colors. Ultimately, I decided to go with the gold, so I was like, I had a couple options that I was in between. Some just like regular cotton embroidery floss, some silk thread, and I had two options. I had this kind of green color here, as well as this light pale gold. And I decided to go with the gold. I think that this just it didn't match as well, and I liked the contrast of the pale gold better. Next up is the absolutely tedious task of cutting out all the bones. Now this pair of stays is pretty heavily boned in my opinion. It's not the most boned, but it's up there. And to make this go a little quicker, I just cut 2 of each as I went and only did half of the stays, if that makes sense. And then I labeled them with a number that corresponded to the channel it belonged to. So it's been like 3 months since I last picked up this project. It is now June. I stopped working on it in March, but we're back. We're ready to do the finishing touches, and that means doing a lot of handwork. So first up is to whip stitch all the seam allowance down. And this actually didn't take as long as I thought. I feel like the other parts before took longer, but I was just procrastinating this so much. And then once everything was whip stitched down, had to go in and whip all of the panels together to actually seam up the stays. And this honestly was the worst part. It hurt my hands so much. I think I actually had to trim some layers down that I didn't do because I don't read things fully. And in the process, definitely broke and bent so many needles because I definitely needed a thicker needle to do so. But alas, we made it through and it's fully seamed together. Okay, I'm finally at the stage where I have all my panels pieced together. Now it's time to cover them with some tape. Now originally I was going to be fancy and use some silk taffeta tape just because I thought it would be nicer and it'd look a little better with the colors of the silk taffeta that I used. Unfortunately, it's definitely too thin. I tried attaching some of it and the needle was just like pulling it all weird. It just isn't sturdy enough for this purpose. Definitely needed like a tape of some sort. So I had to wait and I ordered some linen tape from Burnley and Trowbridge. And that finally came today. So yay! I would have gone with this originally, but it only comes in the natural color and I was really trying to avoid this. I just wanted something that matched and made the whole pair stays a little more cohesive, but I just, had to go with the sensible thing and just go with the linen. So quick update, I've done 1.5 seams with the twill tape that I just bought, and I don't like how it looks at all. I was only like a quarter way through this when I was just like, no, I can't do this. It needs something else. The color doesn't work. It just, like, this is made out of silk taffeta and it has this nice sheen, and then I'm slapping some just plain linen tape over it, and I just feel like it detracts from the look of the stays. So we're back to square one. I did consider not covering them at all at this point because I'm like going back and forth. This is like really holding me up and I want to finish it so bad. So I went ahead and I went through the ribbons and tapes and stuff that I have on hand, and I came across this double face silk satin ribbon that I think is sturdy enough to hold up to the sewing versus the silk taffeta ribbon that I had that just was too finely woven, too like open weave for this job. But unfortunately, after doing some calculations, I am just a few inches too short. And so this is not going to work. However, I did come across another color of double face silk satin ribbon in this nice green. It's a little not what I was originally intending to do, but I have enough of it and I don't think it clashes with the color of the stays, so I think that's what I'm going to go ahead and use. To attach the ribbon to the stays, I'm using a silk thread that just so happened to match the ribbon color that I decided to go with, so that was kind of lucky. And to actually attach it, I'm using a whip stitch. Now the pattern gives you two options. You can do like an inverted herringbone stitch, or you can do a whip stitch. I initially tried doing the herringbone stitch because that's what I saw, I think, most often used, but the ribbon didn't look as good using that stitch because it's not as sturdy as the linen. But the whip stitch, I think, came out pretty good, and so that's what I ended up using. Okay, I finally made it. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, which means it's binding time. So I'm kind of doing the more modern method of binding, which means trimming down the seam allowance and then attaching the binding using, I think, about 1/4 inch. Now I kind of made the mistake here that I didn't make my binding wide enough because I had fully intended on folding it, like double folding it, so that it was completely finished on the inside. And as I was cutting it, I was debating, and unfortunately I didn't listen to my gut, and I cut it needed about like 1/4 inch more. So instead of having a nice clean finish on the inside, I am just whipping down the seam allowance I had left and hoping that'll hold. I do intend to add a lining at some point. I'm not going to do it right now because these are wearable at the moment and I can continue with other things. And so with that said, these are finally done, so why don't we go ahead and try them on.